So hello fellow Earthlings. This is Earthling 6455463728. And I talked to my friend about this a long time ago, and I was telling him that humanity was such an invasive species that it went all the way around the world and then ultimately invaded itself, as in the old world invaded the new world as an invasive species. And I think that when you put it in that particular way, you can see a number of things become clear. So, we know that humanity evolved in supposedly some eastern part of Africa. I think is where they have most of these fossils that they found. And if you look at it from that point of view, we evolved in Africa, probably alongside other creatures. And then some of us would have gone beyond to Europe. And in Europe, just like the Neanderthals, we would have been an invasive species. And I think if you are aware, apparently in the American South, North American South, apparently people had a lot of parasites. And there is an idea that many aspects or derogatory aspects of Americans in the South of America, not South America, but the south of the USA, were attributed to be lazy, and they had an open way of looking at things that people would say was like they were stupid, they were lazy, they were whatever. But this was supposedly as a result of parasites, worms that would infect people in those areas. Now, humanity evolved obviously in a tropical area of Africa, and as a result of that, many of the parasites, many of the creatures that would predate on us were perfectly used to us. We were not a surprise. But as we moved over to Europe, of course we would have brought some of these parasites with us, but many of our predators, many of our parasites, many of diseases that might have been endemic to a particular area, we might have left some of them behind in Africa. And that might explain, to a degree, why Europe or Europeans might have had a slight edge. And for that matter, why Asians might have had a slight edge, being an invasive species in both of these continents. In a place where there might have been a lot of predators, but they would not have evolved alongside us. I think they say that when human beings encountered the dodos, they wouldn't run away because they didn't have predators. So they were like, why should we run? This is not a problem. And it was pretty easy to kill them and get them for meat, and that's the reason why they went extinct. So for predators that we might have met, probably not the brown bear and different types of bear, and maybe not wolves, but Africa has a lot of predators, and beyond just predators, prey animals as well are not, if you think of a wildebeest or something like that, that's probably not an animal that you can just walk up to and say hi. So that's a danger as well as the fact, as I mentioned, that parasites and certain diseases and just even the life cycle of like mosquitoes. There might not have been as many mosquitoes in some areas potentially as there might have been that we might have left in Africa. Even this whole idea about domestication, when you've left some of the things that kill you behind, I can imagine that certain other things can become easier. Also, just as we would have done in colonial days when Europeans were going all over the world, who's to say that we didn't bring certain other invasive species with us to invade the lands that we came to? So when you think of it, Europe and Asia, and even the Americas for that matter, might have been, this amazing new world for us where the predators didn't really know what to make of us, and the prey didn't really know what to make of us, and we would have brought along just, helpers, and we would have changed the landscape as well. Whatever we were used to doing in Africa, we might have made some changes and learned how to do certain things that would change the landscape, just like an invasive species tends to do. And of course, to wrap that whole situation up, when people were in the Americas, and then we invaded, when we invaded the Americas, those people would not have been used to all of the diseases that were brought to them, because they hadn't yet domesticated any animals, and as a result, there was not that transmission and creation of new viruses that came about through the interaction of humans and the domesticated animals. So they didn't have any diseases to give to Columbus and the people who came after, but Columbus and the people who came with him had lots of diseases to give to them, just like an invasive species. So again, we did the same thing all over again. We went over to the Americas with all of these new diseases and ourselves, and all of the technology that they had in Europe, and rats and pigs and horses and all of these other things, to again invade the Americas the way that the first humans had invaded as an invasive species, and they were decimated. So, but there's an interesting idea when you think of it. Supposedly, well, not supposedly, it's a fact that Europeans went to the Americas and completely disrupted the Americas, and went to Asia and disrupted Asia. But Africa was the last continent to be colonized. Now, you might think about it and you might say, well, maybe the Africans were savages. But how about when an invasive species goes home? What happens when an invasive species tries to re-invade home? They probably are going to bounce up with a bunch of animals that not really scared or confused about these new invasive individuals. They're probably going to meet diseases that are very, very much at home with the re-invading invasive species. From parasites to predators to the invasive species kind of having lost some of the adaptations to deal with home, as in the heat, as in whatever parasites. So it's, in many ways, the Europeans would have been an invasive species that was not used to home trying to invade home. And that might explain why Africa was the last place to be colonized. Because when you go back home, what did they say? A prophet is not respected in his home. Is that in the Bible? Yeah, it's the same thing. These Europeans coming back to Africa, and with a relatively few adaptations in terms of lighter skin, getting sunburned, parasites, diseases, predators. It probably was not easy at all, and still is not easy for that matter. So I find it's, we know of how many people have died because of this process of migration. All the Native Americans and all of the colonized peoples in Africa, all the colonized people in Asia, or at least the subjugated people all around the world. And it's not a happy thing, but it's, shall we say, a wryly funny or wryly amusing idea of this invasive species spreading all over the world. Just like, and that was how I was going to start this thing. Isn't it hilarious that we talk about invasive species when we are an invasive species? It's like we complain about, these Asian cod that is spreading all over America. And these, I think there's Asian worms as well, spreading all over America. And then there's these anacondas spreading all over Florida. And even in the UK, I think I can't name any invasive species in the UK. I can't name any in Africa or in South America either. But yeah, it's just, isn't that the height of hilarity? Anyway, guys, you can wish me lucks. You can like, unlike, comment, subscribe, share. And of course, if you really must not do anything, then you can do nothing. Peace.